Thank you, Senator Kelly. Senator Tuberville, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, General.
Morning.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service. And as talking to you yesterday, you moved over 20 times in your career. I don't think a lot of people understand, the complexity of that with a family. So thank you for your service. General, I think most of us up here agree that other than foreign countries, $32 trillion in debt is one of our biggest threats to national security. We're broke. In the past, you have criticized the Department of Defense complex bureaucracy and have expressed a desire to improve its inefficiencies. By law, the Joint Staff is capped at around 2,300 personnel with some exceptions. Can you clarify at this time, how big is our staff as we speak? Do you have a number on that?
Senator, I don't have an exact number. I'll have to get that for you, but I know it's somewhere around 2,000-ish.
Yeah, thank you. I'd appreciate that. The House NDA includes a study to look at reducing the size of the office. Do you have any suggestions on where we could look to cut staff or budget to help and not cut back efficiency?
Not at the moment. As I go into this position, if confirmed, it'll be one of the things I do take a look at when I look across the Joint Staff. And I'd also say, as we look across the aspects of our military departments, if there's things we can do to increase our efficiency and our capability and capacity, those are the things I focus on.
The FY23 budget for the Joint Staff was around $1.2 billion, and the budget request for FY24 is close to $1.3 billion. I guess you're familiar with that, right?
Not the level of details of the Joint Staff
Yeah.
budget, because I've been focused on the Air Force budget.
Okay, thank you. It's pretty high. But I'd like, to give us kind of a rundown the next time we see you in a hearing in terms of where we're at with that. Is it too much? Not enough? We do not want to cut back our military. It is so important, but we also want to be efficient in what we use. So I'd appreciate anything that you could do for us in terms of giving us an update on what you're going to set your team up as, because you're going to be the new leader. So I would hope you'd keep an eye on that, because that is a lot of money. I got an article yesterday that says Air Force delays some moves, bonuses as inflation cuts into personnel budget. Could you explain that? That came from the Stars and Stripes.
Sure, Senator. As we built our budget a couple of years ago, and based on the factors we had, the economic factors, as well as the force mix factors based on different career fields and different rank structure, we typically will come back and ask for reprogramming. We're working through the process of reprogramming so we don't go through an anti-deficiency act and not spend money we don't have. And so part of this is for us to be able to work with Congress to get the reprogramming in place so we can actually, all the pros and impacts are outlined in that article that we communicated to the force here recently. We can reverse and minimize the impact to our airmen and their families throughout the rest of this fiscal year.
Yeah. And we all know how important it is, and I think most of us have talked about it every day. Recruiting, you and I talked about that yesterday. Our recruiting's in a tailspin in most areas, unfortunately. And with an all-volunteer military, we're going to have to do better. We got to do better with salaries, incentives, all those things to get our young men and women involved and interested in our military. I think it's so important. We can have all the upper echelon we can get, but unless we have the people that actually does the job on the ground and in the planes, on the sea, we're going to have huge problems because we live in a dangerous world. So thank you for taking this on. It's going to be a hard job, and any way we can help you, we're here to help. Thank you, General.
Thank you, Senator Tuberville. Senator Warren, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you again, General Brown, and congratulations on your nomination, Mrs. Brown. Welcome here today. So the Department of Defense is full of talented, patriotic leaders who are working hard to keep us safe. Even so, the Pentagon remains too cozy with powerful defense companies that are reaping huge profits from hundreds of billions of dollars in government contracts. When our top leaders leave government service and head straight to big paydays on the boards of the Department of Defense's largest contractors or as defense industry lobbyists, it sends the message that the Pentagon is for sale. Now, during his confirmation hearing before this committee, Secretary Austin publicly committed not to go to work as a lobbyist for defense contractors after he leaves his current job. And I appreciate the commitment, and I believe that the American people do as well. If confirmed, General Brown, you will be the president's top military advisor, and your actions will set the tone for the entire armed forces. So I'd like to hear you make those same commitments. General Brown, if confirmed, will you commit to not going to work as a lobbyist for a defense contractor for 4 years after you leave government service?
You know, Senator, I'm sensitive to the perceptions of conflict of interest that we discussed in your office, and I don't intend to pursue opportunities in the defense sector or a lobbyist upon retirement from military service. You know, my passion is in leadership and mentoring.
Good.
And that's where I want to focus my efforts after military service of building the next generation of leaders.
I appreciate that, and I will take that as a yes. Let's do the second part, even though I think you got the answer in there. Lobbying isn't the only way that former officials cash in on their government service. Giant defense contractors frequently hire former top Pentagon officials in non-lobbying roles and add them to their corporate boards. The former Pentagon official gets paid handsomely, and the defense contractor touts their name in order to get more contracts. General Dunford, the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, joined the board of Lockheed Martin, DoD's top contractor, less than 5 months after leaving government service. And so far, he's received nearly $1 million in compensation in that role. By contrast, Secretary Austin pledged not to join the board of one of these companies when he left government. So, General Brown, if confirmed, do you commit to not receive compensation from a defense contractor for 4 years, including compensation for being a board member?
I did the same answer I just highlighted.
Okay, I'll take that as a yes then. You know, it's really important. I'm going to take you at your word on this, and the American people and I will hold you to it. This is a matter of personal integrity, something that I know is very important to you. I want to close and use our remaining time by asking about the impact of the holds on the promotions and assignments of senior military officers that the senator from Alabama has imposed. The families of these service members are held at a standstill. They're unsure about where to enroll their kids in school or whether they need to arrange a move across country or even somewhere else around the world. General Brown, can you just spend a minute here and talk to us about the impact that these holds are having on our military families?
There's several factors that I think about as we're going through this and how we are working to mitigate the challenges associated with the holes. There's aspects of readiness and the transition in leadership, and for our young service members to know who is in the position of leadership that's qualified, has the experience to be there, and not, in some cases, putting we have strong deputies, but at the same time, they don't have the same level of experience going forward. In addition to the senior officers, there's a whole chain of events that go down to our more junior officers, and that has an impact. It has an impact on their progression in their career field potentially, because if one doesn't get promoted or move on, then they're blocking a spot for someone else. At the same time, we have several members who have served honorably and are ready to retire, but they're going to, in some cases, stay with us to help us mitigate through that challenge. The area that hits us, I think, that we do need to think about is how it impacts our families, because it has an impact not just for the senior officer, but all their staff and all those below them. It has an impact, and as you highlighted, whether it's school, whether it's employment, or the fact that they've already sold their home because they thought they were going to move and now are living in temporary quarters. That creates a challenge. The last thing I'd highlight on that is my concern there is future retention, because we have our more junior officers who now will look up and say, if that's the challenge that I'm going to have to deal with in the future, I'm going to balance between my family and serving in a senior position, and we will lose talent because of those challenges. And the spouse network is alive and well, and the spouses will compare notes. And the member may want to serve, but the spouses and the families get a huge vote and why we continue to be able to serve. And I thank my family for that opportunity to allow me to continue
I
to serve.
see Mrs. Brown nodding her head on this as well. You know, if the senator from Alabama continues his reckless action, he will soon be holding 650 leaders who have served their country honorable hostage. And as you rightly point out, that has effects on many more of the best and brightest who have volunteered to serve our nation. I heard the senator say as he concluded his questions that if there was anything he could do to help you in your actions and help the service, that he would be glad to do it. What he could do to help is lift this stay before it does more damage to our country. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Warren. Senator Budd, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, General Brown, and congrats on your nomination. I enjoyed our meeting last month, just a few weeks ago in my office. In that discussion, we talked about the importance of securing the right capabilities to deter our nation's adversaries. And last week, my office received a long-awaited report on divestment of F-15 aircraft, including at Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in my home state of North Carolina. The report bears your signature, and it states that the Air Force plans to divest the remaining 149 F-15Cs and Ds in the inventory and 119 F-15Es, leaving fewer than 100 E models while procuring only 24 F-15EXs in each of the next 2 years. So I'm concerned about the divestment of a very capable fighter aircraft, particularly F-15Es with upgraded radars and electronic warfare suites. These are the most advanced fourth-generation fighters in the world, with years of service left. It's particularly concerning given the current threat window and the fighter capacity gap that I believe you've talked about repeatedly. So the report states that these cuts will be used to modernize the force. My question is this: what combat-capable platforms are ready and available today, and I emphasize today, that can be procured now, not in the 2030s or the 2040s?
Senator, I understand your concern in the aspect of, as we look this, it goes back to a comment I made a little bit earlier about how we balance capability and capacity. And as we do this, it's not just the platforms themselves, it's the other aspects of our command and control, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities that we will continue to invest in to bring those forward to make each of the platforms we have more capable. Not just for the Air Force, but I'd say the same thing across the Joint Force. And it also has to do with the munitions as well. Because of our procurement cycles for each one of these, it's typically from the time we get a budget, and if we get it on time, which is why that's so important, it takes us about a year to two, in some cases, most times than not, 2 years to get that capability. And so not only on the fighter piece, but it's also the capabilities to make those fighters more relevant and combat capable as we go forward. And that's how we're trying to balance between the two and make sure we have the analysis, the research and development to make sure we're staying ahead of the threat, which actually adds to that as well, and bringing in advanced technologies into some of these into some of the platforms and capabilities we're procuring, not just again for the Air Force, but really for the Joint Force as well.
Thank you, General. In your advanced policy questions regarding the role of Special Operations Forces in implementing the National Defense Strategy, you state, and I quote, "SOF remains ideally suited to identify a competitor's coercive capabilities in the gray zone and counter them with deliberate, credible actions while managing escalation." Given that, end quote. So given that SOF is ideally suited and provides expanded low-cost and credible options for combatant commanders and the President across strategic competition, counterterrorism, and crisis response, would it be in your best military advice, would you give the advice to this committee to cut Special Operations Force structure?
Well, that is something I'd if confirmed, do a bit more analysis on. But I'd also highlight the fact that our Special Operations Forces, over the course of the past 20 years of conflict, grew a fair amount. And as we rebalance the force and think about all the national security challenges that we have to outline in the National Defense Strategy, how, again, we balance that soft capability, what it does today and what it will do in the future, because the aspect of soft, I think, will be a bit different from what we've done, particularly in the Middle East, for the past 20 years.
Well, I understand that. I just have tremendous concerns with what I've seen in the President's budget But let me ask an ongoing question on the same topic. Do you agree that South play a critical role, particularly as it relates to broader efforts to gain influence, advantage, and leverage as part of strategic competition?
They do.
Thank you. Changing topics, military recruiting shortfalls continue to be a grave concern as we consider how the recruiting crisis impacts our nation's military readiness. In our discussions in my office, we talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion policies that, in my view, deter rather than encourage young people to serve. I've heard from many young and qualified individuals from North Carolina who are hesitant to join a force they see as extremely political and defined by DEI policies. In August 22, you signed a memorandum along with a Secretary and Undersecretary of the Air Force directing Air Education and Training Command and the Air Force Academy to achieve diversity and inclusion goals broken down by percentages of both race and sex. We talked about this. It was a good discussion. But I want to give you an opportunity to respond in an open session. What's the purpose of this memo, the one from August of 2022, and how do such policies improve recruiting? Bottom line, I think that we should be suspect of any policies that give advantage to some groups at the expense of others. But I'll give you opportunity.
Senator, the goal is to tap into all the talent across our nation. And that memo outlined applicant goals, and the goal there was to actually outreach to the broader aspects across the nation and show them the opportunities to join the force. What the memo also says is there's a goal to allow those young people to understand what the opportunities are, but to get selected and to come into the academy, ROTC, or any other program, it's merit-based. And they have to be qualified and meet the standard to join. We've got to make sure we provide the opportunity. We've talked about, I've talked personally about recruiting the aspect. Young people only aspire to be what they know about. And if they don't know anything about the military, and we don't outreach to them, we may miss some tremendous talent. But they've got to be qualified because we're a merit-based organization, and that's the way we've operated for an extended period of time, and that's the way we will continue to operate as a military force.
Thank you, General. Yield back.
Thank you, Senator Budd. Senator Peters, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Brown, good to see you again, and congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for your years of service. General Brown, as we discussed, for the U.S. to be able to successfully defend against all the threats that we face in the 21st century, it's going to be absolutely vital that we are as efficient as possible when it comes to our force structure, as well as understanding our limited manpower resources. And as you know very well, our National Guard comprises a significant portion of both our air and ground combat capabilities. And oftentimes, these units actually have a higher level of experience than their active duty counterparts and are more easily able to meet recruiting as well as retention goals. The National Guard is a critical part of our domestic cyber response and mission assurance duties and plays a key role, I think, or I know, between the Department of State and local officials. In a time when innovation is absolutely critical, National Guard installations are able to easily host private sector partners who are conducting testing and evaluation of emerging technologies. And every year, thousands of National Guardsmen build closer ties and increase interoperability with partners and allies across the globe through the state partnership program. Camp Grayling in my home state in northern Michigan is a place where thousands of U.S. troops train alongside NATO and Indo-PACOM partners every summer during Exercise Northern Strike. And I think it's just one example of the tremendous capabilities our National Guard brings to the total force. Simply put, the United States cannot compete with near-peer competitors, combat long-term insurgencies, implement the national defense strategy, or overcome recruiting and retention challenges without an adequately resourced and empowered National Guard. So my question for you, sir, is what investments does the department need to make in the National Guard to build and to maintain a force able to meet the challenges that our nation will face for the rest of this century?
Well, Senator, I have tremendous value of working with the Air National Guard throughout my career, and having had them under my command in combat operations as well as serving as the Air Force Chief of Staff. I think the key are that a couple things that we have to think through as a joint force, and if confirmed as the chairman, is to ensure that our Guard members have the capabilities with the resources and equipment that is modernized so they can be a frontline institution to be ready to go whenever the nation's called. And then at the same time, it's some of the personnel programs we have to ensure that we're taking care of those members and their families, particularly knowing that they change status as they go on and on active duty or get deployed back and forth. The better we can smooth those processes, that helps us out. And then the last thing I would kind of highlight is that the work we do on the active side and how we ensure that the process to retain that talent and bring it over into the Guard or the reserve component. And there's areas that sometimes we make it a little more difficult than it has to be. We may lose an opportunity with a great service member who decides to go do something else. But the value that our Guard provides, whether it's because of their dual status of their civilian career and their military career, I've been a great proponent of the state partnership program that has done tremendous work for our allies and partners. And so the Guard, both the Air and Army Guard, are great assets to our joint force.
Right. Well, it's good to hear that. General Brown, when you assumed the position of Air Force Chief of Staff, you issued a directive for airmen, quote, to accelerate change or lose. You described this concept as a necessity for the Air Force to be able to dominate in a very dynamic, rapidly changing security environment. As chairman, if confirmed, you would have great influence on bringing this type of attitude to what is perhaps the most risk-adverse, bureaucratic organization in the world. So my question for you, sir, is what are the biggest challenges that you can identify to having the department embrace this culture, which I think is essential, of accelerating change?
Well, one of the areas that I've found is I try to do this as and I have made some progress, and I've been happy with some of the progress I've made in certain areas as the Air Force Chief, but at the same time, there's some areas that I'm not as happy about. The challenge there is having all of our service members understand the big picture and why this is so important, why we need to modernize, and what's at stake. And from that perspective, then you step away from your own parochial interests, and then we do what's best, not just for your part of the organization, but what's best for the entire organization. That's how I've approached it as the Air Force Chief of Staff. If confirmed, that's exactly the way I approached it as a chairman, as a Joint Chief. And having served as a Joint Chief, I've had to be able to do the same. We got to be able to do that a bit more across the force and put what's best out front for the force to ensure we're doing the right things to protect the nation and our national interest.
Thank you, General. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Peters. Senator Mullen, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Going kind of on the same lane that Mr. Peters was, but not necessarily the same question, but talking about the accelerating change or lose. When you had originally drafted that as the Air Force Chief of Staff, you outlined the urgent need for technology advancement in your accelerated or change or lose comment. An important factor in our ability to outpace our competitors is the health of our defense industry. Are we able to actually leverage them in an accurate way to be able to have the same mentality to, as you said, accelerate change or lose with the industrial base in the current state that it's in?
I do think we can. And here's the thing I've found as a service chief for the past 2 years after I wrote Accelerate, Change, or Lose, that it's not a flip of a switch. It's a bit of a culture change. It takes a bit of time to get it bought into the force and start to move. And so what I have seen is aspects of the defense and industrial base, aspects of the defense industry to start to shift. We've been able to do it in certain programs, a couple programs for the Air Force. The B-21 program is a good example.
Right.
Sentinel's a good example. Next Generation Air Dominance are good examples where we've taken a different approach to drive ourselves in a different direction. I would say the same thing with AFWorks, where we've been able to build relationships with smaller companies and smaller technologies and have them play in the competitive space. Because that's what happens outside of the Department of Defense. And so we've been able to make some advancements in those areas, but you're still going to have the major defense acquisition programs that are a bit broader. But we are making progress, and that's something we got to continue to do. And if confirmed, the same energy I put in as the Air Force Chief of Staff on accelerating change is the same thing you expect from me as the chairman.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I mean, in the private sector and any sector, we have to accelerate change, or you do fall behind. So I agree with what you're saying, but how do you keep the industrial base nimble without sacrificing legacy systems and knowledge at the same time?
Well, I think part of this is the aspect of how we write our contracts, how we incentivize set the business model, realizing our defense companies have, excuse me, have stakeholders and they've got to report to. And at the same time, we've got to make sure we provide the combat capability for our joint force.
All right.
And so it's important for us to come together, and so we're not talking past each other or debating them, on different sides of the aisle on this, or different sides of the perspective. It's really how do we come together and figure out how we move forward.
Right.
The way I operate is, basically on a Venn diagram. There's some things we agree about. Let's get those and move those forward. And the things we disagree about, how then do we break down those barriers and then help improve. Part of that's building relationships with industry, so they understand where we're going and where what they're trying to achieve, and then we can work together to ensure we're doing what's right for the nation.
Right. Switching gears a little bit, nearly everyone that comes in front of this committee this year has talked about the challenges we have with recruiting. There's also been obviously comments about having to change our posture a little bit because our lack to be able to actually man some of the systems that we're trying to move forward with, or some of the areas that we're trying to grow in. But at the same time, during COVID, we had let 8,000 capable servicemen and women go for not wanting to get the vaccination. As more technologies come out, we think that they probably had the right to do so. But how do we bring those individuals back into the fold now that the pandemic is, quote, over, and get them back plugged in and reinstate them to where they should be if they choose to come back?
Each of the services has a process to allow those members who want to return, and they'll review their them coming back into the service.
Do you support bringing them back in?
On a case-by-case basis with the reviews done by the service.
What would be the case-by-case? I mean, what are red flags for you?
Well, in some cases, there were other factors beyond just the COVID vaccination that may prevent them from.
But it was just, if it was based just specific on the refusal to get the COVID vaccine, you support bringing them back in?
I'd be supportive, but I defer to those that are going through the cases before I don't.
Well, I mean, obviously, being the chairman, you're going to have a big sway in it. If you say, hey, guys, let's bring these guys back in, if this is the only thing that was on their mark, and you say, let's bring them back in, I think most people probably follow that leadership.
Somewhat true, but I'm not in the command chain as if confirmed as a chairman, I'm not in the command chain. There's commanders that make those decisions, but I will provide my advice on how best to approach moving forward.
Well, thank you for your service. Ma'am, Ms. Brown, thank you for your service too, and supporting him along the way. We really appreciate you and the sacrifice you made in raising the family while he was serving the country, and all the 20 moves and making the house a true home for him to come to and feel comfortable. So thank you for that. Sir, appreciate your service and appreciate the conversation we had in my office. Look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Senator Mullen. Senator Rosen, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, General Brown, for your service to our nation, willing to serve in this critical role. Always thank the family members who they serve right alongside with you. So I echo Senator Mullen on that boxing up 20 homes. It can't be easy. But I do want to make a quick comment before my questions, because I do want to say, start out by saying that I am deeply concerned by the fact that your swift confirmation is being held up, along with hundreds of others of senior military promotions, including those in my state of Nevada. That wouldn't be acceptable for any reason, but it's even more outrageous that these holds are to get rid of a policy that protects our service members' reproductive rights. And so this extreme anti-choice agenda, it's jeopardizing our national security in order to impose restrictions on our service members' reproductive freedoms. Enough is enough. We need to fill these critical roles, and I would like to see you have a quick confirmation. And so I'm going to move on to that, General. As my colleagues have been talking about, maintaining our technological edge, because we know that there's global competition for a skilled workforce, declining investments in R&D, and DoD contracting challenges and the STEM workforce gap. they are all impediments to eroding our defense technological edge with our adversaries. Meanwhile, we also know that China is investing heavily in advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, biotechnology, quantum computing. So we talk about accelerate, change, or lose. And that's why this Congress, I introduced bipartisan legislation with Senator Blackburn to establish a pilot program to accelerate the scaling, production, and acquisition of advanced capabilities for national security through a public-private partnership that is going to incentivize American investment in small business that is working on innovative defense technologies. And so this legislation has been included in both the House and Senate versions of the NDAA for fiscal year 2024. So building on some of the prior questions, General Brown, if confirmed, how might the public-private partnership that catalyzes investment in advanced capabilities really enhance our competitiveness with China?
Well, if confirmed, what it does for us is it actually has us being able to tap into all the technical capability within our nation. And that's why the aspect of these public-private partnerships are so important, because there's certain things that happen outside the Department of Defense that provides great capability that it will solve some of the operational problems that we are faced with that will help us better defend the nation. And that partnership, to me, is so important. And it's the aspect of how do we come together and build these relationships, create the dialogue, and solve problems together that benefit both the private sector, but also the public sector, and particularly the Department of Defense.
Thank you. I want to move now on to combating Iranian aggression, because just last week, Iranian naval vessels attempted to seize 2 foreign-flagged commercial tankers right in international waters. Notably, this incident involved an Iranian Navy warship, not an Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps vessel, which is a troubling escalation. So to address Iran's growing naval aggression, I introduced with Senator Ernst the Maritime Act, which is bipartisan legislation that would require the Department of Defense to develop a strategy with our partners and allies in the Middle East to counter these maritime threats posed by Iran. So, General Brown, if confirmed, how would you confront Iranian aggression in all forms, and how would you leverage the regional partnerships fostered by the Abraham Accords to deter Iran's malign actions?
Senator confirmed it's building on my vast experience, particularly in the Middle East. But if you mentioned the Abraham Accords, what I do see is greater cooperation across between the nations within the Middle East. It's something we have to continue to help support. Part of that is ensuring that as we do this, we're also providing them the capabilities to be able to support efforts to push back against Iranian aggression in all forms. And we've been able to do that in the past, but as you highlighted, the war and the threat has gotten more complicated, and so we cannot rest on our laurels. We've got to continue to work hard with our partners in the region and give them the capabilities and also working with them as well, because we've got to be part of the solution as part of the United States in our military force as well.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit again on our capacity to really meet the challenges going forward. And we know that cyber challenges are huge. We know in the private sector, really huge to get that employment, get the skilled technologists, and we know that in the military as well. And as I've noted before this committee numerous times, our nation does face these unprecedented cyber attacks, consistent shortage of talent, cyber talent. They pose a significant threat to our security. I have a bill to find solutions such as my Civilian Cybersecurity Reserve Act. It was included this year as an NDAA for fiscal year 2024 to provide the DoD with qualified civilian personnel to support the department's cyberspace operations and ensure we have the talent needed to defeat, deter, and respond to malicious cyber activity, especially at times of greatest need, to provide surge capacity. And so I know my time is just about up, but if you could answer quickly, how might non-traditional cyber reserve models be a possible pathway to recruit personnel who might not otherwise choose to serve full-time but possess those valuable cyber skills?
Senator, it allows us to tap into the great talent and capability across our nation, and to allow us to address national security needs. And building those relationships, I think, are going to be important as a nation as we go forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Cotton, please.
General Brown, welcome and congratulations on your nomination, and thank you for your decades of service to our nation. And Mrs. Brown, thank you for your decades of service as well. There's been a lot of conversation this morning about munitions. I want to continue that conversation because I view it as one of the most vital challenges the department faces today. Obviously, this is in the context of our support for Ukraine in its defense of its own territory against Russia's unprovoked war of aggression. General Brown, has the Ukraine war caused the challenge to our munitions and defense industrial base, or has it exposed some of the fragility and cracks in the defense industrial base?
Senator, I would say it has exposed, and the reason I say that, I'll just based on experience. When I was Air Commodity Commander for the United States Central Command during the Defeat ISIS campaign, we had some similar conversations. Back in 2017-ish time frame, when North Korea was very active, we did some reviews, and it highlighted it then. Now it's highlighting it even more so. And it's the aspect of why it's important for us to not only invest in the platforms, but got to invest in the munitions that they have enough stockpile, particularly the advanced munitions that are most effective. Those are the things that we have to continue to do, not only from the department, but also as we work with Congress to highlight those needs.
Yeah, I agree with that the war in Ukraine has exposed those cracks and the fragility in our defense industrial base, not caused it. Of course, those concerns are part of the broader context of China and the threat that it poses to Taiwan and our ability to deter Communist China from going for the jugular in Taiwan. One important question here is to think about the kinds of munitions we've been providing to Ukraine and the kinds of munitions we provide to Taiwan, or that we might provide or might use ourselves in the future. Speaking broadly, are the munitions used in Ukraine versus those that might be used in Taiwan, are those completely the same, totally different, or somewhere in the middle but closer to one pole or the other?
I'd say they're somewhat different, just based on the environment that they're operating in. But there are some, some that are similar. I think the key part for us is to ensure, and this is one reason why in this year's budget submission, we had multi-year procurement. And the multi-year procurement was to actually make sure that we actually not only had, the munitions we're going to buy, but also, the facilities as well as the workforce and the supply chain. And that's the value of having these multi-year. So you set some predictability for defense and industrial base, so it's not an up and down with each budget cycle, and that'll help us better, help them better plan and ensure we have the capability not only for ourselves, but as we also think about our allies and partners as well.
Well, I'm glad you raised multi-year procurement, because I think that that's been something that could help address this problem. It's not a silver bullet, but could help address it. To be clear, multi-year procurement, though, isn't necessarily about saving money for the department, but about giving predictability and certainty to the companies across America that assemble or make components for these munitions. Is that correct?
That's correct. It's about building capacity. It's about buying down risk in the future. You can't not put a price tag on risk. Ideally you do want to save money, but in the big scheme of things, it's actually, you got to actually get the facilities built first. That's going to be some capital investment that you can then, when you start to produce, that's where you may get some of the savings in the future.
Because if you're sitting at the head not of the United States military, as you will have confirmed, but rather, say, at the head of a major defense contractor like Lockheed or Northrop, or even one of their subcontractors who, say, makes parts for the rocket motors or the explosives or the steel, those are major capital-intensive investments if you're going to expand a line or even add a new line. And obviously, you'd be concerned if you can't have multi-year certainty that that line is going to be at full capacity. Is that right?
It's not only the line and the capacity, it's also the workforce to ensure they're going to be available, and the subcontractors to support the major aspects that you need to pull together.
I think you and the department have convinced the authorizers on this point. I think maybe the appropriators still need some convincing to do. I'm confident our chairman, who also sits on the Appropriations Committee, can carry your points to the Appropriations Committee. One final question I want to raise, since it's been in the news. is what's sometimes been colloquially called as 155s over the last few days. That's a 155 millimeter artillery shell. That's one of the most basic shells that we use or that our Western partners use. We've spent about $1.5 billion on production of 155 shells over the last 6 years, or I'm sorry, over the last 6 months, to get to the point to quintuple our production rates. I've looked at the inventory numbers, which in combination with donations from other allies and partners don't appear to be approaching concerning levels yet. We've also heard in this committee from several leaders that 155 production rates right now are sustainable. Do you think that we are currently low on 155 millimeter artillery shells?
Senator, I have not looked at it that closely. I'd have to come back to you with maybe a question for the record on that one.
Okay. Could you do that, please? And if confirmed, also, if you conclude that we are not in fact low, could you perhaps, as your role of the principal military advisor to the President, share the news with him? Because I think he may have misspoke somewhat in an interview recently. Thank you, General Brown.
Thank you, Senator Cotton. Senator Schmidt, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, General. General, do we have too many white officers in the Air Force?
Senator, what I really look at is the quality of all the officers that we have, and we look at the aspect of everyone who's qualified, meets the qualifications, is promoted. And what
I would agree with you, but that answer is not consistent with your August 9th memo. In your August 9th memo, you said that you signed on to that there should be a reduction, essentially, of about 9% of the white officers. That's 5,400. We have 5,400, too many white officers. And this is the real impact, I think, of this desire of the administration. I'm saddened to see this in this memo, of this obsession with sort of race-based politics being interjected into our military. How did you come up with the percentage of 67.5% of the officers should be white? And how did you come up with 13% should be black? And how did you come up with 10% should be Asian? And how did you come up with 1.5% should be American Indian and Native Alaskan? How did you come up with 1% being Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander? And how did you come up with 15% of our officers should be Hispanic or Latino?
Senator, that is based on that memo is on application goals, not the actual makeup of the force. And those numbers are based on the demographics of the nation.
Okay, well, all right. There's 10% of our country is Asian American. So is that where you came up with it? Just a percentage of the population?
Essentially.
Because right now the actual percentage, I mean, this is where this is a ridiculous conversation, to be perfectly honest, because why didn't you come up with, or are you going to come up with the percentage of the overall force? Did you contemplate that? Of how many, black Americans should be in the Air Force? Or how many Asian Americans should be in the Air Force? Did you contemplate the total force percentages?
Senator, what we looked at was the aspect of providing opportunities for anybody who wants to serve this qualified.
Listen, if that were the case, if that were what was in this memo, I wouldn't be asking you these questions. But we have in a memo signed by you that you think right now there are too many white officers, and this is a blanket statement. And so I could go down the line of questioning of which of the 5,400 white officers that we have too many should be fired. Because that is the actual impact of all this. I agree with you. Your story about wanting to be the best pilot in the Air Force, regardless of race, that is what the military is supposed to be. It's this great meritocracy. It's why there's uniforms and haircuts. And I've heard so many of my colleagues talk about, infusing abortion politics into this. That is exactly what's wrong. This administration has infused abortion politics into our military, COVID politics into our military, DEI politics into our military, and it is a cancer on the best military in the history of the world. Those men and women deserve better than this. This idea that they have to go through these struggle sessions with DEI training, because trust me, I believe that we ought to have the broadest pool of applicants and get the best and the brightest, and we ought to be recruiting in various areas to make sure we have the best and the brightest from every community, regardless of your race or your gender or your ethnicity. But that's not what DEI is. DEI is an ideology based in cultural Marxism. And somehow, some way, we ended up in a place where a general in the Air Force is advocating for racial quotas, whether it be by applicants or the number of officers or maybe the total unit. And I just think that's wrong. I think that's the wrong approach. You have had a distinguished career, and I thank you for your service. I just don't know how we can continue to have leadership that advocates for this divisive policy. And so I'll ask you also, there have been 8,500 military men and women fired because they chose not to get a vaccine. If confirmed, what would you do to go out, not just they can reapply and there's a process, to go out and recruit these folks back? What would you do to do that? What would you do to accomplish that?
Senator, if confirmed, I'd provide them the opportunity to reapply.
I just don't think that's good enough. I heard that from Secretary Austin. I just don't think that's good enough. We did a great disservice to this country by firing people because they made that decision. I think they ought to be reinstated with rank and back pay. I have not heard that from anybody that's come before this committee, and I'm saddened by that. I think I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Schmidt. Senator Duckworth, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Brown, welcome to you and your family, and congratulations on your nomination. I really enjoyed our discussion last month. I look forward to continuing to work with you on our military's readiness if you are confirmed. Each of the military services faces challenges in meeting recruiting goals, in part due to historically small pool of eligible recruits, and that pool continues to shrink. That's why I'm introducing the Enlist Act to begin to remedy this issue. My legislation enables the Department of Defense to expand its recruiting pool to include longtime residents of this country. This could include many people who love this country and are dedicated to service, like DACA recipients or people who originally came on a work or educational visa and have applied to stay permanently, but can't receive an immigrant visa due to caps in the system. The Enlist Act will aid recruitment efforts by allowing highly skilled and motivated individuals to succeed in the military while still maintaining the department's security requirements and high enlistment standards. General Brown, during our discussion, you described traveling to bases and meeting new Americans eager to serve in the Air National Guard. I'd like to know if you think that the Enlist Act and its expansion of the pool of possible recruits benefits the military recruitment efforts, and I'd also like to hear your perspective on the value that highly qualified immigrants bring to the military.
Senator, as we talked about in your office, it's I do think about those who, as you mentioned, love this country, want to serve, want to raise their right hand and take an oath of office or oath of enlistment, and the aspect of the opportunity for them to become citizens of the United States. It provides an opportunity because in many cases they're very talented, and they want to stay in this nation. There's opportunities that the Enlist Act would help us in some of our recruiting, and again, talent that resides in this nation that wants to serve, and if they want to serve and meet the qualifications, I think they all should be provided the opportunity.
Thank you. I can't think of a better way to show love of this country. You want to be an American? Put on her colors, stand with shoulder to shoulder, and help defend her. I'd like to thank my colleagues on this committee and the staff for their work on this year's NDAA, which supports a strong and ready total force. I'm particularly proud of my NDAA provision expanding TRICARE coverage of assisted reproductive technology, or ART, for current service members and their dependents. Studies show that service members have higher rates of infertility compared to the general population, which is only complicated by an overly restrictive DoD policy and service members' deployment schedules. General Brown, expanding assisted reproductive technology services to female and male members of the uniformed services and their dependents, without regard to coital conception, helps members to start their families that they've always dreamed of. Do you think expanding our service members' access to this important health care is a positive recruiting and retention tool?
Senator, what I believe about we as senior leaders in the military have a responsibility to provide health care for all our members. And when I think about providing health care, I don't try to determine aspects of what type of health care, but health care at large. And we've done that in the past. We need to continue to do and support our military members and their families with the healthcare to ensure they're healthy, and we'll, again, continue to serve and be part of the greatest fighting force in the world.
Thank you, General. And earlier this year, I led an Indo-Pacific CODEL that reinforced to me just how important our alliances and partnerships are in the region. I'm going back there again in August, Philippines, Indonesia, Thailand. I think that these partnerships are incredibly important, and I've asked the same questions of every service chief who's come before this committee, because I think we can be doing so much more to better these key relationships. General Brown, you have deep experience in interacting with allies and partners in the Middle East, in Europe, and in the Indo-Pacific. Can you speak about your personal relationships with air chiefs from other nations and how that may benefit your role as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff if you are confirmed?
Well, Senator, when I think about it, it's all about relationships, and it's the relationships I've been able to build with these various air chiefs. And in some cases, the air chief is retired and a new air chief comes in, so I have relationships in the retired community as well. But it's also providing me opportunities to meet with the various chiefs of defense as I've gone and traveled around the world, and to include the Indo-Pacific. And if confirmed as chairman, I'll have an opportunity to deepen those relationships with the other chiefs of defense. And that's again, the value of these relationships I have as an air chief will open the door. And if I don't know that chief of defense, having a relationship with that air chief actually helps to open the door and continue to build a new relationship with the chief of defense who I don't already know, if confirmed.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I just one very quick 10 seconds. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, because I came in late. I apologize for that. But I only heard half of my colleagues questioning to you. And he seemed to say at the end that he thought that you were advocating for quotas-based racial quotas in recruiting. And I didn't think that was the case. Is it more that my understanding is that you want to broaden the recruiting and allow anybody who wants to serve, who qualifies to serve, and making sure that people have access to service? Or are you actually implementing racial quotas and saying only a certain number of Asians, certain number of Black, certain numbers of whites can be recruited?
The pool, and we do not have quotas. That's against policy for us to have quotas.
Thank you for clarifying that, General.
Senator Scott, please. Thank you, Senator Duckworth.
Sure. First, General Brown, thank you for your service. I want to thank your wife for her service, and thank you you've got a stellar background. I just got back from the Middle East. I was in Israel when they had to go into Jenin and kill the terrorists that were targeting Israeli citizens. And everybody I talked to in Israel, all they talked about was the problems with Iran. Went to Bahrain, and they were concerned about the menace of Iran. And I went to UAE. It's the same thing. Everybody is concerned about what's going on with Iran. Also, while I was over there, the U.S. Navy was able to, and you really have to admire, I think it's Fifth Fleet, what they did. They stopped 2 ships from being taken over by Iranian forces, and did a great job. And so here's my question. Can you, and as far as I understand, most of these tankers that are going through the Strait of Hormuz are not flagged in America. They're not owned by American companies. So can you talk about what's the value of the U.S. military, U.S. Navy being there? That's number one. Number 2 is, are our allies doing their part, all right? Or should we be doing less and let our allies deal with it?
Well, the role of the U.S. Navy in that region is, and along with the other services, is to help provide security within the region, which actually may have a global impact. And so the role that the Navy plays to help the free flow of commerce that impacts not just the United States, but more broadly those countries in the region, but many of our allies and partners, and that plays a key role in our participation there. I think we've got to stay involved with our allies and partners, and as you highlighted, many of the countries in the region have started to talk more about Iran, and I think that's one of the areas that I've, having served there in United States Central Command several times, we've been focused on counterterrorism. You now think about the aspect of Iran in the national security documents, national security strategy, national defense strategy. The coalescing of all the nations now to talk about this provides us an opportunity to work more closely together in our collective efforts to deter the activities by Iran, whether it's in the Strait of Hormuz, in the Gulf, or any other place in the Middle East.
Thank you. Another thing they brought up is, and a lot of the leaders were concerned about what the Biden administration is doing with regard to trying to negotiate some sort of deal with Iran. And then once I get back, I hear that the FBI is investigating Rob Malley, who recently served as President Biden's special envoy to Iran because his security clearance was suspended based on mishandling of classified information. So does this concern you, or you concerned when you're going to have an obligation to try to defend the transit and help Israel, things like that, and then you've got the Biden administration trying to negotiate some deal that is going to possibly give Iran more resources?
Well, sir, the thing I do think about is the role of how all parts of our government play in our overall deterrence. And you know, it's not just what the military does. It's what we do in the diplomatic space, what we do in the information space, what we do economically. I think all those things to work collectively together. And if confirmed as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, I think I have a responsibility not only to provide, I need to provide the military advice, but I need to put it in the context and understanding the other factors that are in play as well.
Okay, thank you. Homestead Air Force Base, we talked about that when we met. Can you talk about the importance of continuing to find a mission for Homestead Air Force Base, especially when you look at what now it looks like China is doing in Cuba? So can you tell me what you believe is the importance of Homestead?
Well, having spent 4 years at Homestead, and matter of fact, that's where my wife and I, our first assignment after we got married, we have fond memories of being there. But to your question, it's the capability we have down in southern Florida, and you know, that reserve unit, and having flown with that reserve unit when I was stationed or active duty, it's still being able to have a capability. That's something that we're working internal to the Air Force to ensure that Homestead, you know, still has a mission, and we still have a platform to operate there. And continuing dialogue that we will have, and we'll have with you as well, and the Air Force will have with you as well as we look at Homestead and ensure that we maintain a mission there.
All right. Thank you, and thanks for your service. Congratulations on your success. When I joined the Navy, it was a melting pot. It was a great melting pot. It gave you an opportunity to meet people that you probably would never meet. And I don't believe in quotas. I don't think anybody should, but I do believe it's a great melting pot. And I think if we can recruit more people from different backgrounds, we ought to be doing that. But don't ever impact somebody's ability to get ahead because, you know, they might have a different skin color or background than somebody else. But it sounds like you completely agree with that.
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Scott and General Brown. Thank you, too. I just want to raise an issue or a discussion about this August 2022 memorandum. It was designed to increase the pool of applicants, essentially to search for more talent. It was not designed to set the composition of the Air Force. Is that accurate?
That's correct. It was only application goals. It was not designed to eliminate the opportunities for anyone. It was just looking to open up the opportunities for as many as we could and make sure we're outreaching to.
And this memorandum was signed by the Secretary of the Air Force, the Undersecretary of the Air Force, the Space Operations Chief, and also, I believe that's it. So it was a combined effort by the leadership of the Department of the Air Force.
Yes, Chairman, it was.
I'd like to quote from the memorandum. These goals are aspirational, aligning resources to invest in our long-term objectives and will not be used in any manner that undermines our merit-based processes. So the memorandum clearly declares that merit is the one standard by which you merit accession to the Air Force and promotion of the Air Force.
Yes, Senator. As a matter of fact, if that kind of statement was not included, I would have never signed that letter.
I completely concur, and I know your character, you would not have signed the letter. General Brown, thank you. I look very forward to your confirmation. I think you will lead with distinction and set an example of professionalism, skill that is continuing the example set by your predecessors. With that, I will adjourn the hearing. Thank you.